Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell. Today we're going to talk about economics. Now what I want to do first is give you some questions, and you can write them down, and then you can answer them as we do the lesson. Here's the lesson. I have several terms here that I want you to know and to try to understand these economic principles overall. A good is any item that can be bought or sold, like shoes, cars, even donuts. A service is an action that can be done in exchange for payment. These people could wash your car if you pay them $5, $10, whatever. This person can put a mud cake or do some kind of whatever on this lady's head if she pays her to do that. This person down here is probably working with air conditioning. So he's probably underneath somebody's house that what he does, they end up paying him to fix the air conditioning or put up things that are better for the air conditioning. Now, the term resources is anything used to produce goods or services. For example, a sewing machine could produce clothes that could be sold as goods. A tractor could produce food that is sold as goods. A tractor, someone who has a tractor, could perform a service. You could pay them to plow whatever field. Take a look here. Human resources. Here's people that are skilled at building things and have the capability of lifting things. I mean, that's their resources, and they provide services, and people pay them to do that. Now, some resources are plentiful, like oxygen. Some are scarce, like silver. Plenty of oxygen, but not that much silver. And I think in this class we've already talked about renewable resources like trees and sunlight. I mean, they're going to come back. Whereas we have some resources like oil that there's a limited supply of. Now, I want to try to explain supply and demand. And I'm going to use the we as an example. Supply is the availability of an item for sale. The availability, for example, of Wii's. If you have a lot of Wii's, you can sell a lot of Wii's. The demand is how much people want to buy them. If nobody wanted to buy a Wii, there would be no demand, regardless of what supply you have. So, let's think of it this way. If you were to have Wii's, If you were to manufacture Wii's, you would want the supply to pretty much equal the demand. There were many years ago when Wii's first came out, and the demand was very high. But what happened when the demand suddenly became high and the Nintendo company only had a few Wii's made? They had to make a lot more Wii's to meet the demands. If only a few people wanted a Wii, then they would not have made more of them. They would not have increased their supply. So, the supply needs to meet the demand. So, if the demand is not very high, the supply should not be very high. If you make too many Wii's, you're going to waste money in selling it. If the demand is too high, more than you can make, if a million people wanted Wii's and you don't have the ability to make a million Wii's, then the demand is too high. And that brings us to these terms here, surplus and scarcity. If the supply is greater than the demand, there is a surplus. If you're going to write a book and order 1 million books to sell, and you don't have 1 million people to sell books to, then you have a surplus of books.
He should know. He wrote a book.
That's true. But anyway, when you have a surplus, the prices go down. If I ordered 1 million books and only 200 people wanted to buy it, then I would have to lower my price to maybe 5 cents a book to try to get rid of some of those books. On the other side, if the demand is greater than the supply, that's when you have scarcity. When everybody wants a Wii and you can't make enough Wiis, you have a scarcity. And that makes prices go up. People would be willing to pay a lot of money for a Wii if there were only a few of them. Let me give you an example. I have heard of a person who made fishing lures at his house. At one point, his lures made Bassmaster magazine, which is distributed all over the world. Suddenly, there were thousands of people wanting his lures, but the problem was, he was just one person who made them one at a time in his house. He couldn't possibly make 1,000 lures very quickly. So there was a lot more demand than there was supply, which means he had a scarcity. He didn't have much of his fishing lures. Sure, people were willing to pay big bucks because they had one of the few of them and they wanted it, but still, he didn't make as much money as he could have. Companies make the optimum amount of money when your supply of goods is about equal to the demand of goods. If you grow watermelons and you sell every single watermelon, you've made the most amount of money. But if you grow 500 more watermelons than people buy, those 500 watermelons just sit and die at some point. Then you don't make as much money. But let's say you grow 10 watermelons, but 100 people could have bought your watermelons. You don't make as much money. So when your supply of goods meets the demand of goods, that's when businesses make their correct amount of money. It doesn't just take a good idea to be successful in business. You have to equal out or come close to equaling out the supply with the demand. Here's some cartoons that have to do with supply and demand. Here's a good one. We have the supply, which doesn't need to overwhelm the demand. We have the demand, which doesn't need to overwhelm the supply. They're pretty much equal strength. You see the person has a balance on top. There has to be an equal balance of supply and demand for things to work out. Here, kind of the same premise. We have somebody who is looking at a scale of supply and demand. It should pretty much equal out. Too much supply, you won't make as much. Too much demand, you won't make as much. Take a look at this one. This big car represents the world oil demand. The world demands oil. Lots of cars, lots of things that need oil. But according to this little script here, we have just a little bitty guy who fills up with oil, that there's not as much oil. And that is one of the reasons why the price has gone up over the last 15 years on gasoline, because there's more demand than there is ability to make it work, or the ability to fill that demand. Here's another one. Speaking of demand, this person here selling lemonade is charging $200 per cup of lemonade, because anybody that wanders by has a huge demand for lemonade. There's a huge demand for it because people will be starving, literally willing to give all that they have. And we'll shrink that. Now let's talk about the law of supply and the law of demand. Pardon me just a second. The law of supply and the law of demand. The law of supply says if the price goes up, that the price will go up and then the supply will go up. If the price goes up, the supply will go up. I'll give you an example. Here we have one donut. What if one donut was $100? You know, if you knew how to make donuts, you might be tempted to go home and make a dozen donuts and make $1,200. You could do it if people paid $100 per donut. So if people suddenly want to make the money, want to go home and make donuts, the supply will go up. So as the price goes up, the supply goes up. But what about the law of demand? Here's the law of demand. Let me get my pen capabilities here. The law of demand says when the price goes down, as the price goes down, demand goes up. Right now, people like donuts, but they're probably not going to have it every day. I mean, donuts do cost a little bit. If you go to Dunkin' Donuts, then you buy several donuts, you'll be shelling out a few dollars. But what if you found donuts were worth 1 penny? Then people would be buying donuts all over the place. Even if you had a huge breakfast, 3 donuts, 4 donuts, it'd be less than 5 cents you'd pay, 3 cents or 4 cents. The demand would go up as the price goes down. And that is the law of demand. Well, I hope you have learned a little bit about economics and these terms.